It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. You're live with Expresso. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've just joined us, where have you been? But your timing is pretty good as we now turn to health matters. World Diabetes Day is celebrated on the 14th of November throughout the world in over 160 countries and reaches, get this, a global audience of over 1 billion people. Talk about awareness. It is estimated that close to 500 million people suffer from diabetes. That is incredible. So to shed some light on the topic of diabetes and about the effects of the disease on human health, please welcome from the Sweet Life, Bridget McNulty and specialist physician Marius Wasserfall. Bridget, Marius, welcome, guys.
Thank you so much. I mean, like everyone that can be affected by this disease condition. I know my family suffers from this. Like my family, it comes along on my aunties all have this. But for those of you who don't know what it is, exactly what is diabetes?
Marius? The problem I think you need to state first is that about 1 in 10 to 1 in 11 people in the world have got diabetes. So it is a massive, massive problem, and it is getting worse. So diabetes really is an abnormality of glucose metabolism, where you either have too little insulin or you've got enough insulin, but you cannot use that insulin. So in the end, you have glucose being trapped inside the blood vessels, and they cannot get out into the body cells where glucose is actually needed to produce energy via metabolism. So in the cells, you don't have glucose, so you develop all kinds of problems, but in the blood vessels, you've got a massive amount of sugar that circulates through your body, leading to all kinds of organ dysfunctions. And it's because of those organ dysfunctions that people really are dying across the world. And the whole pandemic of obesity, people getting more overweight, sedentary lifestyles, inactivity, is really driving more and more diabetes. And diabetes leads to, amongst others, heart attacks and strokes, which are currently the #1 and 2 causes of death in the world.
If you're not in control, though. I always want to jump in and say
You're not in control.
So there's type 1 diabetes, which is about 10% of people, and type 2 diabetes, which affects 90% of people. And if you're in good control, if you're diagnosed early enough, you can live a perfectly normal, happy, healthy life with diabetes. I have type 1 diabetes myself. And type 2, if it's diagnosed really early, is you can turn it around with changes in your lifestyle and your diet. Otherwise, you take medication. And if you are in good control, there's nothing you can't do because of diabetes. And it's a weird balancing act, because you want to say there are all these terrible risks and complications, but if you're in good control, you can live a perfectly normal life.
Type 1, type 2, essentially, what are the differences?
The big difference between the two being that type 1s typically have either a very ill or a dysfunctional pancreas. So they do not produce insulin at all. So they have got an absolute insulin deficiency, and there's no other way to treat them but with insulin.
And is this a genetic predisposition?
There is always a genetic predisposition, and they are at this stage hypothesizing that various factors, viral infections, etc., can be contributing. But if you've got a family member, especially a parent, with type 1 diabetes, then you do have an increased risk. Now that you have to then contrast to type 2 diabetes, who is actually more a lifestyle illness. You also have familial risks, you also have some congenital risks, and genetic factors, but that is really more a disease of lifestyle. People being sedentary, being overweight leading to insulin resistance, and over time you lose your pancreatic function. And that is the problem why type 2 diabetics often are undiagnosed. And we said earlier on that currently about 467 million people in the world are diabetic. They're expecting that to increase by 140% up until the year 2040. The problem is up to 80% of diabetics, specifically type 2s, are not yet diagnosed. They present with the problems that are associated with diabetes, the well-known complications, where the type 1s are usually diagnosed very early because they present with the symptoms, they present with the comas, where the type 2s actually present with the complications late in the illness.
It's a very gradual trajectory that takes us to that
And
peak.
3 in 5 people are undiagnosed in South Africa, but getting diagnosed is as easy as a finger prick blood test. It takes less than 5 minutes, it doesn't hurt, it's not expensive. Clinics are giving away free blood testing, so many of the local pharmacies, and that can make a huge difference, because if you know that you're at risk, then you're never going to get to the point where you need to have the complications.
We are going to continue this chat. So many questions, but I think just the sheer volume, it almost feels like it's part of the modern human condition, just like the sedentary lifestyle, like the fatigue a lot of us suffer from. And I think the fact that so many people are going undiagnosed is really where this awareness campaign, where World Diabetes Day needs to come to bear. So hopefully we'll continue to spread that word, but we'll continue this discussion with these two very interesting guests in just a moment.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to it. It is your feel-good breakfast show, Expresso, here on SABC3. Now, just before the break, we were speaking all things diabetes, and it is a World Diabetes Day on the 14th of November. And just to continue the conversation, we have Bridget and Marius here in studio. So thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it was very informative. We're speaking about type 1, type 2, and so much questions that we still have for you.
I think a big line for me, first of all, it's quite alarming to know the extent to which diabetes is experienced across the globe and here in South Africa. But I think a line for me is how much of it is predetermined as a condition that you are going to suffer from, and how much can be brought on by lifestyle elements. Being overweight is something that has been mentioned by both of you a couple of times now. How much more at risk are you when you are overweight, and how does that factor in?
No, it's probably exponentially more. I think, like with all things in life, with diseases, you've got a genetic predisposition, and you've got some kind of an environmental trigger. Let's say you're predisposed to having cancer and you smoke, that's your trigger. Then you get cancer. So the same here is going to be if you've got some kind of a predisposition and you're going to have a lifestyle that fits, that can suit as a trigger, you're going to develop an illness. And that's what happens with diabetes. And it's happening earlier and earlier. If you look at how overweight the country is, not only South Africa, but the world. But I mean, we recently won kind of a top 10 prize for being one of the most overweight countries in the world. And our children are becoming overweight. And where type 2 diabetes used to be an illness really of above 40, above 45s, it is starting to become an illness of people in their 20s. And we've even got type 2s, earlier on than that because of the overweight. And over time, because your body is so insulin resistant, your pancreas has to work so hard to overcome the insulin resistance. Because remember that obesity is not determined only by the subcutaneous fat, the fat that we can see, and the fat people often want to go and have liposuction for. That is not the problem fat. The problem really is the visceral fat. The fat is on the inside of the organs. And that fat is actually an endocrine organ. Fat releases all kinds of hormones. And that fat leads to insulin resistance, and that in the end then can lead to diabetes. But that goes along with all the other risk factors and all the other comorbid conditions. For example, 80% of diabetics have got high blood pressure. 70% of them have got high cholesterol. A lot of them still smoke. And now we've got this overweight smoker who's diabetic and hypertension, and he's got a family history of people having heart attacks and strokes. And that is just the perfect storm.
Determined that he's got diabetes because he hasn't been detected. Wow,
and then they present with a complication.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I also think so much of diabetes is an emotional condition, because you think about how we feel when we eat with our families. And if you're the kind of family who gets takeaway for Sunday lunch and then lies around on the couch watching TV, your risk of diabetes is going to be very different to if you're the kind of family.
It's almost a cultural thing.
Yeah, it is a cultural thing. It's actually, it's starting to be called like metabolic Ubuntu, because we pass it around.
How much of this, sorry, Jamie, to cut in there, in a cultural sense within South Africa and in an economic sense, would you say that it's more prevalent in poorer communities because of the lack of access to good nutrients?
I think it's more the lack of access to education. So one of the things I find fascinating, I run Sweet Life and Diabetic South Africans, which is South Africa's largest online diabetes community. And a lot of what we do is just talk about the living with diabetes. So what do you eat? What are your questions? Do you have any advice? And the lack of diabetes education in general, I think as a country, we just don't know enough about diabetes. And so it's things like, people are told, okay, you must cut out all sugar, sweets, cookies, fizzy drinks. And then I'll have someone saying to me, I'm not having any fizzy drinks, but I'm drinking orange juice all day because orange juice is healthy.
Yeah.
But actually, orange juice and Coke have got pretty much the same amount of sugar in them.
Yeah. Fruit is sugar.
And in juice, it's a very concentrated form. And so I think, in general, we need to also switch the angle. It's very dramatic to say, everyone has to go on a diabetes diet. There's actually no such thing as the diabetes diet. It's just the kind of food we should all be eating. We should be having half of our plate should be filled with vegetables or salad, and we should have a quarter of protein and a quarter of
these things probably apply
whole
to
grain
every
carbs.
condition.
Everyone. We should all be doing exercise.
But you are right, though. If you're going to look at the number 1 and number 2 causes of death in the world is heart attacks and strokes. Except in your developed countries, not the developing countries, in developed countries, cancer has now overtaken heart attacks and strokes as the leading cause of death. But in developing countries, it is still driven by heart attacks and strokes, being driven by diabetes and hypertension, etc. And the scary thing is that in the year 2015, diabetes and diabetes-related complications killed more people in the world than HIV, TB, and malaria combined.
And in 2016, diabetes was the #1 killer of women in South Africa.
Absolutely.
Stats SA said. How is this not front page news?
So I kind of feel like I want to say the companies producing the food at the lower end of the economic scale, you guys need to up your nutrient content. Or it's crazy to me. We're going to continue this discussion. I want to get into the signs of diabetes so we can promote early detection if possible. But rather sobering discussion we are having around diabetes at the moment. Obviously, all in lieu of World Diabetes Day, trying to connect with as many people out there to share, empathize with the community that does have diabetes, but also hopefully educate as many people as possible about some of the causes, some of those risk factors, and what we need to do to detect it early as possible.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. You're live with Expresso. Thank you so much for tuning in. Just a half an hour left or so to savor with you. We are talking about diabetes with a representative of the Sweet Life, Bridget McNulty, and specialist physician Marius. Wasserfall. Guys, thank you so much. This has been a very interesting and slightly alarming, to be honest, discussion.
Absolutely. But we spoke about, being overweight, the lifestyle, but what are some of the, like signs and symptoms that we can see that, will trigger that question is like, what is diabetes to us,
There are 5 common symptoms you want to be on the alert for.
Okay.
Extreme tiredness, constant hunger, constant thirst, needing to pee a lot, especially at night, and blurry vision. The trouble with these symptoms is that they're quite, like many people will be like, I think I've got a couple of those.
Yeah.
And also, people can explain them away a lot. You can just be having flu, or it's been a rough week, or you're not sleeping enough. And so I really like to encourage people that if you are at risk at all, so if you are obese or overweight, if you have a family history of diabetes, if you have any heart issues, if you're over 45, go and get your blood sugar checked. Honestly, so you can get it at any of the public clinics. It's for free. Clicks Clinics is doing a promotion in November that it's free. It takes 5 minutes. You'll know straight away. And I really think it should be one of those things that we're doing once a year. So, like, we all know our HIV status. We should all know our diabetes number.
I would actually advise that you even do it before 45, because I've got a lot of patients in their 20s and their 30s with type 2 diabetes in my practice. The problem is that type 1 diabetes often presents with what we call polyuria, polydipsia, and the weight loss. So polyuria and polydipsia meaning drinking a lot. Your body is trying to dilute that high concentration of sugar in your blood. And then you wee a lot and you're losing sugar. But that's the type 1s, and they often present in comas. The type 2 patients often do not present with any symptoms until they present with complications. They present with the heart attack or with the stroke or with the foot problems or whatever the case may be. And the problem is picking those up before they actually develop the complications, because you actually need to have 7 to 10 years of impaired pancreatic function before you really develop sugars high enough that we pick it up on a finger prick test. But in those 7 to 10 years, you already start to develop complications. That's why patients often present with complications and then we tell them, you just had your heart attack because of diabetes. And they'll tell you, but doctor, how can that be? Because I've just been diagnosed. Yes, but it is because it has been in your body for the past 7 to 10 years. So we should really use a day like the 14th of November, and people should go and have their sugars tested, as many as possible, because of that number of 3 in 5 and world statistics, up to 80% of people are not yet diagnosed.
I was going to say, sisters at the clinics, brace yourselves. Brace yourselves, because...
And also, again, though, if you're diagnosed early enough, it's not a big deal. You have to change your lifestyle so you live healthier. You might have to take
should be doing that anyway.
We should all be doing that anyway.
So we've had a host of comments and questions, and people really loving the show this morning and the discussion, so thank you so much. Christelle Salam posing this question, she prefaces it by saying, diabetes runs in my family. We've lost both parents to it. Our condolences, and both my siblings are diabetic. I recently did a blood test, but I was clear. How often should I get a blood test? We've kind of touched on that, but in her case, maybe how often should she be looking? And also, how often should I get my 2-year-old checked for diabetes? How young can it present? Can it be there? as a predisposition, as you say, can it exhibit in a 2-year-old?
We've got patients that are diagnosed at the age of 2 or 3 months.
Wow.
Where the babies present in comas, and that presents a huge challenge to the parents. Bridget will be able to tell us more. I mean, your little baby having diabetes, that's type 1 specifically. So it can be very young. Where for her specifically, I think an annual blood test is important, but be careful, because with a finger prick test by itself, or what we say either a fasting test or a test during the day, you can miss a certain amount of diabetes, and you can miss them in that first 7 to 10 years. So in her case, I would advise that she actually goes for what we call the oral glucose tolerance test, which is a sugar challenge test. So you go to your lab fasting, they give you a certain amount of glucose, and they test your pancreas response and your insulin response
how your body
and your sugar response after 1 hour and 2 hours, and they can then identify whether she is in an impaired glucose tolerance range, in other words, a pre-diabetic. And at that time already she can intervene so that she hopefully does not develop the complications.
And obviously make the lifestyle changes. So change diet if necessary, lose weight if necessary. They say exercise should be 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week. It can just be walking around the block. I do think we need to make it clear that these lifestyle changes don't have to be huge, dramatic, nothing fun can ever happen again. We need to change the way that we eat in a sustainable way so that it's possible to keep eating like this forever. You don't want to be falling off the wagon.
Thank you so much to the viewers. There are so many questions here. We're going to have to bring you guys back. I think maybe make this a weekly discussion. I've found it hugely informative. So thank you so much. The viewers have clearly enjoyed it. I think the most important thing, just very quickly, how can people connect with you and your community?
So anyone who has questions, if they can, if they're on Facebook, they can join Diabetic South Africans. As I said, we're South Africa's largest online diabetes community. Or our website is sweetlife.org.za, and we have all kinds of advice and articles and tips on living well with diabetes. It's all from medical experts. We have a great panel of experts.
Guys, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I think the most important thing to take out of this is go and get yourself tested. It is free. If you are predisposed, you think, due to your weight or family history, maybe go for a slightly more comprehensive test, but get tested, find out, and just live a healthier lifestyle. Make that change today.